On the 11th of the 5th moon, Viz Leany entered Varjanspor, the mouth of the fjord leading to Varjarstad. Soon they drew up to a damaged longship making its way steadily along the inlet, conveying far more men than a standard ship's crew. Anticipating they would likely be too proud to accept help, Satara conferred briefly with Vendela before hailing Depth's Teeth. She approached the captain, Nimon Ostergar Ingmar Juptand, with an offer of trade, and secured some barrels of oil in exchange for some of their grain. With Satara agreeing to carry their cargo to Varjarstad for Captain Ingmar, they roped the ships together and hosted members of Depth's Teeth in order to secure the traded cargo. Over the next 2 days, the crew of Viz Leany learned from the Skinden crew that many of them had been sailors on the whaling ship Deep Tide, captained by Ingmar's cousin, Holger Andreas Longjat. The two ships were hunting a great leviathan that had been attacking Skinden fishing vessels when Deep Tide was lost, along with her captain and many of her crew, leaving Depth's Teeth to limp back to Varjarstad, overloaded. Arriving in Varjarstad, the crew was invited to the celebration of the fallen to be held that evening. As Vendela went to visit her family, the crew toured the city. Checking out the shops along the main thoroughfare, Achaidh had some difficulty finding a buyer for his jewelry, until he came upon the shop of Larsson Dier Aron Hammaren, a smith who mainly sold fine weapons, along with some jewelry. Aron agreed to consign a few of Achaigh's pieces and purchased some gems. Impressed by the captain's Achaidh scimitars, Aron shared a lively discussion with Satara about decoration and adornment. When the crew inquired about finding bone and ivory for carving, they discovered Aron was friends with both Ingmar and Andreas. Upset by the news of Andreas' death, Aron retreated into his work.
Spending the rest of the day shopping and exploring the city, the crew found themselves struck by the differences between Varjarstad and Jinla. Having been recently rebuilt, Varjarstad was much more simply arranged and far less extravagant. With fewer shops and only a handful of foreigners about, the crew felt somewhat out of place. That evening, the crew bore witness to a mass funeral of the fallen of the two whaling ships. With few words spoken by Ingmar, the bodies of the dead were burned on a series of pyres and their spirits sent to the halls of the Lord of Flame. After the fires had burned down, the crew followed the locals to a mead hall owned by Olholzer Stinen Eriker, a great barrel of a man. Finding themselves quite fond of Eriker's mead, Kasumi and Achaidh proceeded to get quite drunk.
As Satara went to fetch herself more drink, she felt a smart smack on her rump. She turned to find the offending hand belonged to a heavily intoxicated man, and she good-naturedly dismissed his advances. Despite his friend's counsel, Bernd persisted, suggesting he could show her how to use those swords, and so Satara humored him, drawing her blades as he clumsily waved about his own. Bernd floundered through the bloodless duel until Satara finished the exchange with a swift spank to his rear with the flat of her blade, much to the amusement of those assembled. After the night's merriment, Dasha, feeling rather affected by the mead, staggered her way back towards the ship, while Satara and Mezi chose to sleep it off in one of the mead hall's side rooms. The next morning, Dasha awoke to find herself on the floor of the captain's quarters on Viz Leany. Aside from the usual assortment of curios and trinkets, she found the captain's desk littered with fragments of poetry on pieces of parchment and bits of etched metal, as well as engraving tools. Joining the crew for breakfast in the mess, Dasha learned they had found her passed out on the docks that night, and Kanuki had carried her aboard. Once Satara and Mezi awoke, they returned to the hall to find Achaidh and Kasumi, still very much inebriated. Determined to prove their sobriety, the men stumbled towards the door to greet the morning sun, only for Achaidh to nearly pass out from the rush of cold air as they flung open the door. The pair wisely chose to head to bed, and Mezi went to see Basim for a hangover remedy. Satara made her way to Aron's shop to see about repairing the dings the drunken Bernd had left on her swords. Afterwards, she went in search of Vendela. She found her brother-in-law, Skala Urster Sigfroder Garvar, at his tannery just outside the city. He sent his son, Mikael, to take Satara to their home, though the boy insisted she call him Trisvard. The boy brought Satara to a modest longhouse, where Vendela invited her in and introduced her family. Vendela's sister, Dorotha, called out for her daughter, Catherine, but for several minutes they only caught glimpses of the shy girl until her curiosity finally coaxed her out from hiding. The boy, who had been eyeing her scimitars the entire way, finally asked Sitara if she really was a warrior. Sitara replied that she was no soldier, but many times she had fought to defend herself or protect others, so yes, she supposed she was. He seemed satisfied, but Vendela warned her that amongst the skinned-in, Sitara's swords marked her as a warrior, and in carrying them, she might be challenged to prove that honor. The reason MacLeod wished to be called Trisvard, wooden sword, was because he had a notion for his deed name already. Vendela remarked with amusement that the boy took after his mother, and would surely earn a deed name as proud as hers. Despite her sister's embarrassment, Vendela recounted the tale of how, when MacLeod was very young, Dorotha had bravely defended her child against a walrus bull and slew the beast, earning the nickname Varaspanan. After chatting with the sister, Sitara spent some time training MacLeod in swordplay.
As Dasha and Mezzi were returning to the ship, they ran into a middle-aged Dacian man accompanying a young woman with flaming red hair. When they inquired where they might stable their horses and find lodging, Dasha directed them to the city. Making their way to Erdikers, the strange pair noticed the cache, but kept their distance while bartering with the innkeep for room and board.
As the crew gathered for breakfast the next day, the newcomers approached them and introduced themselves. Lisbeth and her uncle Kort had come to Varjorstad in search of someone, though whom they would not say. At first, Lisbeth asked the crew's recommendation for how she might ingratiate herself with the locals, though eventually she offered to assist the crew, in return for information about a woman she sought named Galvir Astrid Isabrod. Suspecting the personal importance of the young woman's search, and sympathetic to her efforts, Sitara promised to discover what she could, if Lisbeth and her uncle could make themselves useful on the ship in the meantime. As Dasha was meeting with Eriker to strike a deal for Viz Leany's cargo, Sitara went to Vendela to learn who she should speak to about lending their aid with the Leviathan. While Varjorstad was governed by a council of elders from each of the major clans, a matter such as this fell under the jurisdiction of Niemann Matthias Prokien, the elder in charge of its fleet. Better acquainted now with how to approach the proud Skinden with offers of assistance, Sitara sought out Matthias, prepared with a bargain. She would lend her crew and ship, armed with 3 ballistae, to the endeavor of hunting the beast which had plagued their longships, in exchange for a share of the spoils, and for a chance to learn from the great northern sailors. Amused by her gumption, he accepted, and they settled on a modest but fair percentage of the take once the Leviathan's carcass had been brought back to Varjorstad.
The captain returned to Editors to share the news of her deal with Matthias, to find the conversation with new companions and turn tense upon the revelation that a cache was gin-blooded. While the Achaidh viewed those like a cache as gifted with the blessing of the jinn somewhere in their bloodline, the more well-traveled amongst the crew knew that Dacians viewed such people with suspicion at best, and outright hostility at worst. In Lisbeth's home, they were dubbed the Cursed or Tainted, granted with dark powers by the enigmatic and evil goddess Sibyl, the Witch. Lisbeth listened, exchanging glances with her uncle, as the crew defended Akash's presence on their ship as a boon in their sea voyages and adventures. Though the crew could still perceive their nervousness, in the end, Lisbeth and Kort agreed to uphold their end of the bargain and accompany Viz Leany on the Leviathan hunt. It was worth the danger, she decided, if it would gain her the favor of those who could help her learn about the woman she sought, who Lisbeth confirmed was in fact her mother. Afterwards, Akash spent some time attempting to gather stories of those such as himself amongst the Skinden. While he found few tales, he did receive friendly words of caution. The Skinden bore no ill will towards those like Akash, who used their abilities to help others and showed the proper respect. However, those who abused their power for selfish gain were known to be abominations, corrupted by the old gods.
Meanwhile, the captain met with Jian and Aaron to discuss armaments for the upcoming hunt. While Jian, Nemat, and Emrys were all capable of using the ship's 3 ballistae, Emrys preferred his own longbow, and Mezzi and Kasumi elected to begin training on the ballistae as well. Dasha gave Lisbeth and Kort a tour of Viz Leany and introduced their crew. In the mess they met Kasumi, who had finally recovered from his night of drinking, And while the two Dachshunds were initially startled by Kanuki's appearance, tempers settled as he went about his duties on board ship. The next morning, Matthias visited Viz Leany to inform them they would depart on their venture at dawn the next day, with his ship Stormvargen and possibly one other. Satara followed after him to inquire if he might be familiar with the person Lisbeth was seeking, and if he knew of Satara's own father, Nassim bin Ashlaf Hariri. Matthias revealed Satara's father had been in Vargjarstad some time before his disappearance during the Long Dark, and that he was well thought of amongst the Skindin. Matthias also confirmed he knew of the person Lisbeth sought, and if he was satisfied that Lisbeth was who she claimed to be, he would give her that information. Though Satara requested it as a favor, Matthias stated plainly that knowledge of the state of one's family was something that should never be held over a person. Returning to the ship, Dasha found Satara in a very pensive mood. After Satara shared what she had learned, Dasha assured her that she felt certain her father, wherever he was surely doing everything in his power to return home to her. Though Satara agreed that yes, her father would do everything he could, Dasha sensed that Satara's realization had not brought hope, but rather a mournful acceptance. Once Vendela arrived back at the ship, Kasumi inquired if they might commission her brother-in-law to craft a leather harness, describing a design he had contrived so one could wear them on without having to hold it in hand. As Vendela agreed to see what Sigfrodr could do, Mezi tried her hand at using them on once more, reveling in its power as she launched a spear all the way across the harbor, much to the amazement of the assembled sailors. Dasha had just set about carving amulets of the hunt for the crew, when Akash approached her for assistance. He showed her a manuscript page he had acquired in Rakosis, which he believed was originally from an Oami text. While Dasha confirmed it was in fact Oami, she found it most strange, for while the Oami did possess a written language, they kept no texts, as their histories and stories were passed down orally by their lore-keepers. Seeing as she could barely make out the meaning of the script, Dasha believed it to be from a very old source indeed. Satara set about town to spread word of the hunt. After quite a bit of carousing and finding some willing recruits, Satara found one man unmoved by her calls to action, first insulting her, then questioning her blades and her honor. After some tense words, she met his challenge, drawing her sword, though the Skindin man proved faster with his long knife. A quick exchange gave both fighters a respect for the other. When given a chance to stand down, Satara, uncertain of her opponent, continued the attack. Finding themselves evenly matched, Satara drew him in. As he attempted to cut her attack short, he found himself caught in a second stroke which drove her sword into his side. The man, painfully wounded, broke into raucous laughter and demanded a round for the pair. Finding a new drinking partner in Gulebrand Kai, the two drank into the night, vowing to see each other in the morn for the hunt. At dawn on the 17th of the 5th moon, Viz Leany, accompanying Stormwolf, captained by Matthias Krokjen, and Breakwave, captained by Ingmar Djuptand, set sail to pursue the elusive and deadly Leviathan. A few days later, the ship stopped along the coast, and the crew spent some time socializing amongst themselves. Having noticed the captain's drinking horn appeared to be intricately carved with Skindin patterns and designs, Lisbeth complimented the craftsmanship and inquired about the piece. Satara showed it to her, explaining she had received it as a gift on her 16th birthday from her brother. Not her first mate, but a Skindin lad her father had adopted when they were children. At supper, the crews gave tribute to ensure the favor of the Lord of Flame and the Queen of Winter on their endeavor. Satara performed a blade dance, both graceful and turbulent at once, as an offering, and Mezi likewise demonstrated an athletic and powerful spear form. The crew's spirits invigorated for the hunt ahead, they continued their journey into the Sea of Ice.
After a week and a day of sailing, they were finally approaching the waters of the Leviathan attacks, putting everyone on guard. After sailing for several more hours, the crew spotted a pod of small white whales. The creatures rode their wake and swam playfully about their bow, entertaining the crew, until suddenly they scattered. Spotting a surge in the water, Embers called out, and Achaidh blasted a warning to the two longships. The creature, which was speeding towards them just under the surface, resembled a great whale, though its head appeared to be solid bone, with two great black orbs for eyes, and dark, rough, scaly skin running along its back. It rammed the longships repeatedly, tossing many sailors overboard. As it turned straight for Viz Leany next, only Achaigh's quick thinking and power prevented it from impacting the ship as he commanded the winds, driving air beneath the hull to lift the ship briefly at the last moment. In the midst of the chaos, Elizabeth reached out to the pod of small whales with her thoughts, in hopes of summoning allies. While she felt her mind touch theirs, the creature's primal fear of the Leviathan flooded her senses, sending her into a panic.
When the beast turned to charge Viz Leany, Kasumi shot a ballista bolt in the creature's palate. Taking hold of a rope, Sitara swung herself down along the side of the ship to stab her blade into the beast's hide as she passed it by. As the battle raged on, the three ships drew close. The creature drove itself into Stormwolf, ramming the longboat. Having regained her composure, Lisbeth called out once more to the pod of whales. This time, they regrouped and shot in at the Leviathan, surrounding it and driving it off. As the beast retreated, Stormwolf managed to right itself, and the crew steeled themselves for the next strike. They had barely recovered when Mezzy spotted the Leviathan speeding back towards the longships. With impeccable aim, she stuck a harpoon in the creature's shoulder just below its flipper. The beast thrashed in rage and dove out of sight. As the crew of Viz Leany felt the sea begin to lift up the ship beneath them, Achaidh called upon the winds just in time to keep the ship aright as the creature breached the surface between the ships. Crashing into Stormwolf, the beast thrashed about, slamming the longship repeatedly. In a moment of valiant determination, Sitara took a running start on the deck, grabbed a rope, and swung overboard, launching herself at the beast, drawing both swords mid-air as she hurtled towards the Leviathan until she fell just short of it, landing in the water near the creature's head, still brandishing her blades.
Elizabeth attempted to reach out to the Leviathan with her mind to calm it, but was instead driven into a fury by the beast's own unquenchable rage. Finally discerning Elizabeth's true nature and realizing what she had been doing, Achaidh called out to her, forcing her mind back into herself, just as the Leviathan opened its massive jaws, swallowing Captain Sitara whole. Not about to be outdone by a little southerner, Matthias leapt from his own ship and lay into the beast with hook and axe. Realizing things had taken a dire turn, Kasumi ran to the captain's quarters to retrieve the Mon. As Kasumi searched her cabin, Ingmar rammed the Leviathan with the breakwave, raining spears and harpoons down upon it. Achaidh, in a frenzy, leapt from Viz Leany and drove a spear into the creature, driving it deeper and deeper as Viz Leany rammed the creature's exposed tail, preventing it from turning. Kasumi ran out onto the deck, and upon realizing the captain was nowhere to be seen, correctly assumed she had jumped off the side of the ship to face the whale in single combat. After a moment of mental and emotional crisis, Kasumi handed Mezzy the Mon, urging she rescue the captain from her madness. Mezzy successfully jumped atop the whale and ran along the beast before launching herself upwards and driving her spear down through the Leviathan's jaw and into its brain, finally killing it. As the aura of the Mon slowly faded, more gradually than before, Sitara wrenched the beast's jaws open, with her swords pulling herself free. Celebrating the beast's demise and the bravery of their captains, the crew spent some time recovering from their ordeal and making the necessary repairs to sail back with their quarry. Lashing the carcass between the longships, with Viz Leany towing it, they made their way steadily back to Vargerstad.
As they began their journey back, Achaidh approached Elizabeth about what had happened during the Leviathan attack, and spoke with her at length about her mysterious affinity for beasts. Though he understood her earlier hesitation to reveal her nature, he urged Elizabeth not to be ashamed of her strange powers, but to embrace them, encouraging her to practice to gain better control over them. Achaidh felt a sense of joy at finding another Jinblood, and pride at being able to help her, as he had had no one to help him. Reassuring her that she was not alone, Achaidh told her there were others in the world like them, and that they should look out for one another.
One afternoon, Dasha began to notice odd behavior in some of the birds that were circling the ships. She witnessed an eagle attacking a tern when a kite swooped in at the eagle, driving it off. Believing she had experienced a vision, she confided in the captain about the strange occurrence and asked her thoughts on it.
After confirming that the strange sight was not, in fact, Lisbeth's doing, the two Awami wondered at its possible meaning. Sitara did her best, though she had little to offer Dasha, as she had no real practice reading dreams, much less waking dreams. They did, however, discuss at length several matters of faith: dreams, visions, and visitory.
Meanwhile, Kasumi was very interested in how the Mon had reacted to Mezi's slaying of the Leviathan. Kasumi noted that Mezi appeared to have avoided the backlash of using the Mon and wasn't fatigued at all. Kasumi hypothesized that due to the dark nature of the Mon, it may be connected to death on some level, and perhaps taking a life pays the toll that the user typically pays. When they arrived back in Vargerstad on the 6th of the 6th moon, Matthias held a presentation on the beach in front of the beached creature, dubbing Viz Leany's crew Fellain, Beastbane. The rest of the day was spent in celebration, with Kasumi getting involved in a drinking challenge and some members of the crew finding company with the locals.
Though some were still recovering from the celebration, the crew each went about their own business the next morning. As he had promised, Matthias met with Lisbeth and revealed the truth about her mother. Galvier Astrid Isabrot, whom he had known personally, was a brave warrior who had fought alongside the great Eindride in the reclaiming of Vargerstad. She had died honorably during the battle, and was now entombed in the great ice cave of Ischel with the other fallen daughters of Eindride. After learning of her mother's fate, Lisbeth returned to Viz Leany, where Achaidh was waiting. Offering his assistance, Achaidh accompanied Lisbeth into the forest so that she might practice and hone her mystical talents.
Solomon Katil Varyasvang visited the crew of Viz Leany and thanked them for the service he understood they rendered his kin in Beastinar. They gifted the elder with a gold necklace set with rubies and sapphires Achaidh had crafted for him over the course of their journey to Vargerstad. Afterwards, Sitara sought out her friend Kai, wishing to learn more about the skin and style of knife fighting. After several rounds of sparring, Sitara began to learn what to anticipate from his attacks, and how better to counter them.
Meanwhile, Kasumi and Mezi traveled into the forest to practice with the Mon. Killing a stag easily enough, Kasumi convinced Mezi to hunt for something more dangerous. Tracking down a bear, the two opened with their bows. The bear, unimpressed by their arrows, charged them. Mezi stabbed it with her spear, thinking to bring it down, but was surprised at its resilience. As the bear viciously mauled Mezi, she found herself drawing upon a well of power bound in a harness on her chest. She felt a presence pass through her as she twisted her spear into the beast, returning its roar with matched ferocity. Refusing to go quietly, the bear lashed on, sinking its teeth into her shoulder before finally succumbing to its wounds.
Kasumi, in a panic, managed to pull Mezi out from under the bear's corpse and out of the clearing. Mezi limped with Kasumi's help for some time before she finally collapsed. Drawing upon the Mon himself, Kasumi carried Mezi out of the forest in a blind run, finally emerging from the forest edge before collapsing himself. Dasha and Sitara were informed that two of their crew had been found bloodied in the forest. After arriving at the healers, they found Mezi heavily bandaged, with Kasumi also unconscious but seemingly unharmed. Achaidh and Lisbeth, returning from their training, also heard of the pair's condition and made all speed to the healers. An intense conversation followed amongst the crew, with a solemn Kasumi apologizing and admitting he had made a terrible mistake which had almost cost Mezi her life. With Kasumi appropriately chastised, Kasumi, Dasha, and Lisbeth went to retrieve the stag and bear the pair had killed, returning with it late that night. The next day, Mezi was able to return to the ship. Though her wounds were severe, she was suffering even more from her extended use of the Mon. Kasumi, in a similar condition, sans the physical wounds, was also in for some much-needed rest. While they were recovering, both Mezi and Kasumi saw similar visions of the cloaked figure with the spear, troubling the two. Mezi, Kasumi, and Akash spoke about the implications of overusing the Mon, with Kasumi suggesting that using the Mon too frequently could kill them, or even allow the Mon to influence them. It was agreed that they should use the Mon sparingly, and there should always be more than one person present when testing it.
Later, Matthias arrived with the crew's share of the Leviathan's bounty, including crates of meat, blubber, and bone, barrels of oil, smaller barrels of a special refined oil, a crate of whalestones, and a case of 20 Leviathan teeth. Sitara divvied the teeth amongst the crew members, setting aside one tooth for their patron, and the rest as cargo. She went to Aaron's shop to commission a copper pendant, in addition to securing from him some worked metal to deliver to her mother's clan. That evening, Sitara, Akash, and Dasha dined at Erikers. While they were roundly greeted by the regulars, they were somewhat surprised when another traveler approached them, an Awami at that. Introducing herself as a wanderer named Masha, she was very inquisitive about their adventures, and seemed to take a fancy to Dasha. Once Sitara and Akash took their leave, Masha continued to flirt vigorously until Dasha finally bid her goodnight, leaving her disappointed. The next day, the crew met for lunch at Erikers, and Sitara agreed to take on Masha as a passenger for the voyage to the Owamre forest. Somewhat dismayed at the prospect of their ardent new passenger, Dasha returned to the ship and visited Mezi in her quarters, delivering a cape she had made from the fur of the bear Mezi had slain, with its head as the hood.
Viz Leany departed from Vargastad on the 11th of 6th moon to sail towards the Owamre forest to the section of the coast traveled by the Kraishi, Sitara's mother's tribe. Shortly after boarding, Masha ran into Kanuki below decks. Though initially startled by his presence, she allowed herself to be comforted by Dasha. Professing her love for the beautiful giantess, Masha stole a kiss, leaving Dasha confused and upset. Later, Masha approached the captain, hoping to enlist her aid in winning Dasha's affections. Amused but aware of Dasha's discomfort, Sitara politely declined, though she offered Masha some tidbits about Dasha's interests and her fondness for animals. The crew stopped at Beistanar on the eve of the 19th, spending the night in the longhouse built in their honor. Dasha spent some time communing with the stone's circle, while Akash took rubbings of the very faint markings on the stones. Sitara met with Karina to ask about how things had been since their last visit. Masha offered to pay Kasumi to set up an amiable encounter with Dasha, which Kasumi appeared to accept, also bringing Akash in on the plan. Unbeknownst to Masha, Kasumi and Akash were actually plotting to put her in a defenseless situation so they could interrogate her about her intentions. Unfortunately, the scheme was cut short when Sitara caught the two carrying Hidon out in the middle of the night. After scolding the two idiots for what she assumed was another attempt to torment Dasha, they returned the cantankerous goat and decided to leave Masha alone for the time being. As the weeks passed, Dasha became unusually preoccupied, though her brooding was often interrupted by Masha's unabated flirting. When Dasha was finally forced to put her foot down, Kasumi and Akash confronted Masha, demanding to know her true motivations. Masha confessed to the crew that she was a bounty hunter who had been hired by the Laranovna clan to track down their wayward daughter and convince her to come home, ergo the seduction. Dasha finally admitted, both to herself and her friends, that she had decided it was time to return home. While her companions were rather taken aback by these revelations, the bounty hunter recovered fairly quickly from the shock. Glancing around the room, Masha inquired, "So, do I still get the reward?" On the 15th of the 7th moon, the morning of Dasha's 28th birthday, the party spied the massive looming spires over the Owamre forest.